very much. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to start by making a confession to you. I am here for the sole purpose of impressing my children. That's it. I've been in show business, I worked out for 37 years now, and I have kids who they've grown up with all manner of famous people in their lives. Not one of them has ever caused them to so much as blink until tonight. So normally, at the dinner table, you know, they don't pay me much attention. And I happen to remark, I've been asked to interview Sir David Attenborough, and honestly, stunned silence. Possibly even close to a frisson of respect. And I thought this was fascinating. I said, is it because he's the man responsible for first televising snooker? But that is what I think about. I grew up in the United States, and every summer we would come and stay with my English grandparents in Surrey. And inexplicably, we would watch a game played with coloured balls on a black and white television, which, on a Saturday, we then had to go and pay for at Radio Rentals. It was an astonishing thing, and I thought, who is the genius that thought of that? Well, it's tonight's guest, and I would have thought that was enough to celebrate any man. But my children weirdly knew nothing about this whatsoever. No, they knew two things. First of all, it seems Sir David has made one or two quite popular natural history programmes, and also my son has been invited to a David Attenborough rave. Isn't that fantastic? David Attenborough rave. It just sounds like one of those examples of words that don't really go together. Like Greek economist. Don't worry, I'm not here for long. Over the course of a remarkable career spanning over 6 decades, David has travelled the globe and revolutionised how we see the natural world, and I think he has met most of the animal kingdom, who sadly couldn't be with us this evening. I'm sure they send their best wishes. Sir David Attenborough. Right, now, David, you're obviously a broadcasting legend, so I'm not going to sit here and diss you, but is there any truth to the rumour that you bagged your first job in TV without having really seen any?
Yes.
You're not really qualified?
I've seen one programme.
What was it?
It was a play by Ennui, transmitted live. Forgot what it was called. I hadn't got a television set. My wife-to-be, my girlfriend had, parents had. I saw that, and I applied for a job in radio, and I didn't get an interview, and a fortnight later, someone wrote to me from the BBC and said, we've got this new thing called television. People are being quite rude about it, but we think there could be something in it. Would you like to come to Alexandra Palace and see if you'd be interested? Really?
Well, so we're talking about 1952,
yeah.
And it was then known as the Talks Department. I mean, it sounds like sort of radio with pictures, really.
Well, that's indeed so. But what other name would you give to it was effectively all non-fiction television. And there were about a dozen, no, less than that, 8 television producers who did all non-fiction. I just exclude sport and outside broadcast, but all the rest. I mean, religion, politics, quizzes, cooking, knitting, all that sort of stuff. And I used to do sometimes, it was all live, I should say. And I would produce maybe 1 or 2 programs a week. That was quite intense. It wasn't always like that, but we did anything. And people would come into the canteen and said, we've got a problem. And the Radio Times is just going to press, and we've got absolutely nothing for next Tuesday at 7:30. Anybody got any ideas? Oh, you know, Yeah. No, really.
But what I love, people probably don't realise why we call it the gallery in television, but in Alexandra Palace it was literally, wasn't it? That's where it comes from.
Yes, it was, right up the top,
sort of a gantry
yeah,
high. So it's a classic showbiz story in lots of ways, because you were the understudy who became the star in a sort of way. I mean, you stepped in front of the camera when the original presenter of Zoo Quest was a gentleman called Jack Lester. He was taken unwell.
Yes.
And you were producing, is that right?
Yes, it was the London Zoo sent out an expedition to collect animals. I mean, we cooked it up with this chap, lovely man called Jack Lester, who was an expert on reptiles. And I said, look, I want to go to Africa, you know. And he said, yeah, well, come on. And we cooked up this idea. And the idea was that we would film Jack collecting things. And then when we got back, we would show them live in the studio. And the first program, this was 1954, the first program, poor Jack was very ill. And so the second program was going on the next week. It was live, and Jack had dropped out. And the director of television said, Attenborough, you will have to go and do it and go on over. Staff no fee, I remember he said very clearly.
So just part of your remit.
It's part of your job.
Yeah.
And so I did. And then I did the rest of the series. And then the following year, we were going to do it again because it was quite a success. But again, Jack was going to do it. And again, he went out. But this time he came very ill indeed, just before the transmission, or well, halfway during the expedition. And so I took over. And it was too good a racket to let it go. And Jack was very keen on saying, you know, OK, you carry on, which is what I did for the next 10 years. Really.
So that first time, when the cameras go live and the red light goes on, that very first time, do you remember that? Were you terrified, or did you take to it?
Well, I've been doing live programmes as a
producer,
as a director. So the atmosphere of the studio, which of course, as you know, and many of you here will know, I mean, it's champagne, isn't it? I mean, it's really very, very exciting. And particularly when you know it's live. And particularly, I mean, when you drove away from the evening, you know, you're coming down from Alexandra Palace around the North Circular, and if there was that eerie glow on those curtains, you know, there were no people there with a television set. And they would have been watching you, they would have seen your programme, and you almost wanted to stop and knock on the door and say, do you think it was all right? I'm awfully sorry about that last bit. Yeah. But it was champagne stuff, yeah.
But you think how the world has changed now? Because, I mean, that programme, Zoo Quest, there you were going to collect animals for the zoo. I mean, it seems unfathomable to us now as a natural history programme, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. And so zoos don't do that anymore. It was a fag end of a Victorian tradition, really. And quite right, too. I mean, the natural world's under enough problems as it is without people going out to try and catch more things. But, but it was... In those days, we didn't have long enough lenses to get close-ups of animals at any distance. Okay. So the only way you were going to see the close-up of, say, a gaboon viper, you know, is about to strike a cobra about to strike. You couldn't film that, really, properly. So the thing you do was you have to do it in the studio, which is what... So the excuse was, there was a chap from the zoo who understood about catching cobras and gaboon vipers and so on. He would pick it up, and that was on film. And then, in order to get the details and show how this, that, and the other, you had it live in the studio. Because where you could really get close, you could really get cameras close, and so on. That's what we did. I mean, if you saw them now, you couldn't believe how crude they were. But at that time, you see, nobody had seen an aardvark. No, nobody had seen a sloth. And everything you did, it didn't matter how badly you did it, they hadn't seen that sort of stuff before. And so they thought, did you see the aardvark last night? You know.
I know the thing that you kept looking for. In fact, one of the reasons why you did Zoo Quest, you were looking for a white-necked rock fowl.
Yes, indeed.
Did you ever find it?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did, actually. I mean, and we... I remember we we called it by its proper name, which was Picathartes gymnocephalus.
Oh, I say.
Yeah, they were. And I remember this quite unimportant bird, the only qualification it had was that nobody had ever seen it alive. No European had ever seen it alive. So we actually caught quite early on in the expedition. It was 3 months out there. But we didn't let on for that. See,
No.
the first programme, here we are, we're going out to look for Piccadilly's gymnocephalus, you see. And then at the end, you didn't see the damn thing, but at the end, you'd say, well, so we continued our quest for the Piccadilly. And the cameraman and I, Charlie Lagos, who was the film cameraman, we were in his little red open MG driving along Oxford Street, I remember, which you could do then. And we were a bit worried about this Piccadilly's gymnocephalus. I mean, was the great British public going to become frightfully excited by that? So? And as we stopped by the lights, the bus driver leant down and he said, hello, Dave. He said, but are we or are we not going to find bicker bloody party?
Would have been lousy telly if you'd said at the beginning that you'd already got it, wouldn't it? No, it was terrible television. What was it about presenting that made you want to continue? What was
the racket of going out there.
Right.
I mean, that was the fun. My job was a television producer, and the Zoo Quest stuff was the thing you did half the year. The other half of the year, I produced prime ministers' broadcasts, and I produced quizzes and all sorts of things, and travel programs. But it was the spring of television. I mean, we were just starting. You know, only one network. You know, 405 blind pictures. And so you couldn't tear yourself away from it. It was so exciting, and every time, people used to just think of programs and dream them up and say, look, what about a program on heraldry? And they say, heraldry? Oh, that's a very good idea. I think it's absolutely first class. How many would? And we used to do that. That's what we used to do.
I mean, that's a wonderful time to be there with lots and lots of firsts. And presumably, I mean, your whole career has been full of firsts, but the first time you saw, for example, a Komodo dragon, or the first time that you saw a creature that had not been filmed and shown into people's sitting rooms, there must have been a moment of just supreme excitement that you're saying to people, come and see what I've got.
Unbelievable. I mean, it was, you see, people hadn't seen anything. I mean, the Komodo Dragon had never been seen on film. That's not quite true. The Americans in the 1920s, who actually were the first person to actually notice that there was this unknown species so far, they had filmed it, but it hadn't been filmed on nobody on television had seen it. And that film that they took in the 20s, nobody had seen that either. So effectively, this was the first time. And it was, I was able to say quite truthfully and honestly, nobody's seen this before. Here is the biggest lizard in the world. And everybody said, yes, astounding. And what a privilege, though, and the feel of it. Mind you, it was absolutely balmy. I mean, the way we did it. I mean, it took us 3 months. The cameraman and I just pushed off. I remember the boss of the chap who looked after the business affairs, the talks department. He was for some reason or other, if you know the BBC, it would be very typical of those days. He was an expert in Icelandic sagas.
Perfect.
Yes, he was.
Ideal.
Absolutely ideal for the job.
Yes.
And I remember he said, what sort of budget do you want? I said, well, not a lot, because, feeding on rice and, I said, I don't know, say £500 a programme. He said, yeah, I think it's perfectly reasonable. How many programs? And I said, well, I think about 6 probably. Yeah, that's a very good idea. Back for Christmas, will you be? And I said, goodbye.
No health and safety briefing?
None at all. I couldn't speak a word of Indonesian. I mean, it was absolutely balmy.
Well, did you have to write home and say, we're all fine, it's all carrying on?
Yes, if you wanted a reply. That was 3 weeks to get a letter home. There was no radio, there was no telephone.
Yeah.
I mean, I said goodbye to my dear wife, and I'll see you on Christmas.
I think programs should be made like that now. I think it's absolutely fantastic. The wonderful thing is when I watch you and you have moments like, a crocodile coming at you, or you meet a Komodo dragon for the first time, you don't seem to be fazed. Did you realise early on that you were not afraid? You were much more enthralled than ever showing any fear.
I am afraid.
Oh.
But the camera's on the animal. And the bit where, you've got these binoculars looking straight at the camera, that sort of thing, the animal's not there. That's absolutely cut in, you see. So you haven't seen me saying, oh, my God.
Look at the size of that dragon. Oh,
yeah.
Lord. Well, we've actually got a clip from ZooQuest. Shall we have a look?
Very well.
The locals recommended that we should use a dead goat as bait. Once in the bush, we began to build a trap using materials gathered from nearby, as I recorded in my journal.
And now, all we had to do was to wait.
That's a shot.
There was a rustle in the bush, and there was the dragon. Our first sight of this magnificent monster. And down came the door. Hastily, we piled boulders on the door so that he couldn't lift it up. We'd got him.
Oh, wonderful. But you can hear how everybody's going, oh. I mean, this looks slightly terrifying. There's many wonderful shots of you hiding behind bushes. I like that.
Yeah, well, that's the one. Those, fortunately, the audience has got wise to this sort of thing.
Right.
So you don't see that anymore. That's very much a period shot of the 50s. Looking straight at the camera and pretending you're looking at a dragon, you know.
I think it's a shame. I think we should do a film of you just behind different bushes around the world.
Yeah, right. Well, I've got a lot of that, yeah.
There was a brief hiatus for you from presenting, because in 1965 you were appointed as controller of the newly launched BBC Two. You were responsible for all sorts of experimental commissions, I suppose Monty Python.
Yes.
And Kenneth Clarke's Civilization, not to mention first regular colour broadcasts in Europe. So I just want to talk about the snooker just for a brief minute, because I was made to watch this as a child, but my grandparents didn't have a colour television. It was because you had some spare colour televisions that you decided to put the snooker on. Is that true?
Well, it is true that we hadn't put snooker on television at all because of the problem of seeing it in colour.
Yeah.
And what was equally true is that we had few colour cameras, believe it or not. We were very short of equipment. And with just 3 cameras, you could, and a snooker ball, a table, which you know how big that is, you could get hours and hours and hours of television. I remember talking to the commentators for the first one, and I said, of course, I mean, we're doing this because of colour, but a number of people with colour televisions, it's very small. So I said, look, you'll have to guide that people are watching it in black and white. And he said, yes, of course, I do understand. So I think it was the very first or the second programme in which he actually had this rather breathy delivery, you know, and he used to say, oh, no, he's going to go for the pink. And for those of you who've got black and white sets, the pink is next door to the green.
I have to tell you, my father, who was Danish, was baffled by this kind of broadcasting. He just didn't understand it at all. How did you take to being in charge of a channel? I mean, presumably, were you able to make programmes at the same time?
No, not was on 2. But it was absolutely blissful. I mean, you were kind enough to mention some titles which were successful. But the whole point about BBC Two was that it was experimental and that we would not do any programme. What I said at the beginning was, we will do no programmes that are black and white carbon copies of what's on black and white. People will turn on the set and they will know immediately that that's BBC Two, just from content. And I don't want any repetition of what's on other networks. So that we did just new things all the time. Now, people say, oh, frightfully brave that was, but it wasn't actually, because the number, BBC Two, people forget, BBC Two, you had to go buy a new set in order to see BBC Two. If you had BBC One, it was 405 lines. BBC Two was on 625, and you had to do a great clunking switch to go which one other. And so BBC Two had a very odd audience. But we appealed to it on the grounds that it was different. And if it wasn't interesting, people didn't turn over.
But it must have been hugely exciting, because, I mean, today a lot of television is decided by committees. But presumably you could have had an idea in the bath and think, oh, we'll make that.
Oh, frequently. No, really. Yeah, really. Absolutely.
And is it true that you did actually get rid of an animal while you were the controller of BBC Two? Because did you not get rid of the mascot? There was the kangaroo and her joey called Custard, I think it was.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you got rid of the kangaroo?
Yes, it was all over the notepaper, I remember. I mean, there was an embossed kangaroo. And I was given this as Network's notepaper, and it looks like programs for kiddies, you know. And I said, won't see it anymore. I don't want to do that. We're a grown-up network.
I don't know if it's true. I mean, I don't know if were you there for the opening of BBC Two at Alexandra
No,
Palace?
I only took it over when it was 11 months old, just less than a year old.
Because I think on the opening night they got a real kangaroo, and the lights all went out and it got stuck in the lift. Classic BBC story, I think. So did you continue, because of you have a passion for natural history, were you able to continue to commission programmes while you were in charge?
Yes, I commissioned a series that was called The World About Us. It then became The Natural World and one thing and another, and it's still running, actually. And you wouldn't believe how funny television was in the 50s, you know. There was no 1 hour, 50-minute documentary of any kind on BBC One or ITV. And so BBC Two, one of the pioneering things did, it would start a tradition of showing 50-minute programmes. So we made all kinds of, I remember one of the things we made in the documentary series, it was called One Pair of Eyes. And it was deliberate that, in fact, you took someone who had a balmy idea of some sort and allowed him to have a producer and cameraman and so on and make a programme about what he thought you should do about bullfighting or in support of it, you know, or whatever, something odd. And there was no 1 hour programme documentary on BBC One. So it was a thrilling time.
And do you bemoan the loss of that? That slightly more maverick time?
Well, yes, it was fun. But nothing stays the same, and it can't remain the same. And that was that particular moment in television in which had this sort of champagne feel to it.
Well, let's have a look at some of the programmes that you went on to make after your role at BBC Two.
The South American rainforest, the richest and most varied assemblage of life in the world. Those are howler monkeys up there. There are around 50 different kinds of monkeys in these forests. As soon as the males see a movement in the eggs, they will, apparently, eat them. Each male may take a dozen or so, but he doesn't swallow them. Instead, they go into his vocal sac that runs down the front of his throat. And there they develop and wriggle. After some weeks, their extraordinary vocal pregnancy comes to an end. And here is that amazing birth once again, in slow motion. A crab like this is carrying about 100,000 eggs, and she has to shed them directly into the sea if they are to hatch. But that's a hazardous business for her, because although her far distant ancestors came from the sea, she herself is a land crab, and she can't swim. So if a wave sweeps her away, she will assuredly drown. But nonetheless, her compulsion to launch the next generation is irresistible. I am walking across what was once the bed of that river, and above me rises the biggest dam ever built by man. It contains enough concrete to construct a whole city to house 4 million people. It will make a lake which will stretch upstream for 140 kilometers.
To persuade females to come close and admire his plumes, he sings the most complex song he can manage, and he does that by copying the songs of all the other birds he hears around him, such as the kookaburra. He also, in his attempt to outsing his rivals, incorporates other sounds that he hears in the forest. That was a camera shutter. And now a camera with a motor drive. and that's a car alarm. Now the sounds of foresters and their chainsaws working nearby.
And it's very, very rare that there is any violence within the group. So it seems really very unfair that man should have chosen the gorilla to symbolise all that is aggressive and violent, when that's the one thing that the gorilla is not, and that we are.
I have to say, David, watching that frog giving birth, there's not a woman in the room that's not thinking, I'm so glad nature didn't give me that form of reproduction. It's very pleasant. What do you feel like when you see your younger self? Do you think you could possibly have predicted not just the scale of all the work that you've done, but the impact that it has had?
No, you had no idea, really. And to start with, of course, you didn't, because in the 50s, it was a minority thing. I mean, the number of sets that people had was very small. But it grew and it grew and it grew. And so you got used to it, I suppose.
I mean, in 2011, you broke the record for the most viewed natural history programme with Frozen Planet. 2016, you broke it again with Planet Earth 2. I don't know how you feel about beating your own records. It's like Mo Farah running against himself.
Well, of course, natural history programmes aren't made in the way that we made those. Even Life on Earth was a comparatively small unit. I mean, Blue Planet 2, there were 50 people, you know, working on it. Directors, several directors, and 20 cameramen, editors, and so on. And so it's a very big deal now. And my responsibility is entirely with the words now on that particular series. In that I write the commentary and record the commentary. But the shaping of the programme, the credit for that, which I regard as great. I mean, I think they're marvellously put together. And it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to those people who did that. And because my face and voice is associated with it, I get all the credit, you know.
Oh, how nice.
Well, oh, yes, but you know, uncomfortable, really. You know, I mean, everybody thinks I made Blue Planet 2. I didn't make Blue Planet 2. James Honeyborn made Blue Planet 2. The whole group of them.
Sure, but I think you're being modest about your contribution. What do you, I mean, what's astonishing is the age bracket, sort of 16 to 34. I mean, much more popular than X Factor or any of the reality shows, Love Island or any of those things. What do you put it down to?
I put it down
to that age group.
Well, because kids, I mean, small children are riveted by the natural world. It's something in us. We're a part of it. Kids know that. They look at these things. It's alive. How does it breathe? What does it feed on? How does it produce its babies? And once that's in your mind, you can't get rid of it. And the people, it's such a privilege to make these programs because I get a lot of letters, but I might get a letter from a 7-year-old saying, I love that, this, that, and the other. But I can equally well, the next letter could be from a professor of 75 who said, I'm very interested in that particular action. How did you get the shot and what does it mean? Because for every single one of us, at any time in our lives, there are things you don't know about the natural world. And it's beautiful. It's unpredictable. It tells you things you didn't know. It doesn't try and sell you anything. And it doesn't ask for your vote. Now, what more do you want from a television program?
So, of course, my children are hugely excited to meet you this evening. What I want to know is, have you been invited to a David Attenborough rave?
No, nothing.
You know anything about it? You're not getting a cut of the profits. We've got a picture. Apparently, they all have masks of you, and the whole place is done up as a jungle theme, apparently. And everybody is you for the evening.
Oh, good luck.
Let's talk a bit about, I mean, you're being very modest about your own contribution, but your narrative style. I wonder whether that has changed, because you must be aware of how it's no longer a niche thing to be interested in natural history. It's very mainstream, and I wonder if it changes because you get a letter from a 7-year-old and a 75-year-old professor, and you know you need to address both of them. Well, I think if you've been a producer, it helps a lot. And when in the 50s we were putting films together, you were in a cutting room and you're getting the shots and you were hanging them up on pegs and you were putting them together in a certain order to tell a story. And your aim was to have no commentary at all. What you wanted to do was the pictures to tell the story, because they could. All you had to do was to restrict your words to the bits of information that were necessary to understand the pictures. And for a start, you don't need adjectives, you know. If you don't need to say it's wonderful and so on, people can see it. Yes, it's okay. And you don't have to. So you cut down the commentary to a minimum. And when I look at stuff I did years ago, if I have a criticism, which I do on all sides, but almost always I say to myself, too many words. If you'd cut down that by another 10% of the words, you'd have done better. And it's editing the pictures to tell the story, and you just add those little bits of information that are necessary. Keep it down to a minimum. And is there a difficulty in balancing up? Because you, as you say, you want the pictures to speak for themselves, but you're also educating as well as entertaining. Is there a moment when you think, I know so much about this creature, but actually I need to tell them less in a way? I need to just let the creature make those noises? Yes, absolutely. I mean, if the thing tells enough to make the majority of the audience hang on and see what's going to happen, don't interfere with it. Yeah, just leave it there. Well, I have to say one of the standout moments for me, for audiences, in fact, it was voted Virgin TV's must-see moment at the Virgin TV British Academy Television Awards. It was the snakes versus iguana chase. Am I right, people? Unbelievable. I tell you what, let's revisit this moment, also with a few familiar TV faces.
On flat ground, a baby iguana can outrun a racer snake. But others are waiting in ambush.
Oh, that snake have got him. Oh, my God. Oh. Oh, no.
Oh! Nature is brutal. Nature is brutal. Do you know, I fucking hate snakes.
I fucking hate snakes.
Another hatchling has its first glimpse of a dangerous world.
Just stay down, mate. Don't bother getting up.
Don't come out yet.
He wants to have a look round. Have a look round behind you before you go, mate.
A snake's eyes aren't very good, but they can detect movement.
Don't fucking move.
So if the hatchling keeps its nerve, it may just avoid detection.
Easy. Easy.
Run! Run!
Come on, run!
Go on, go on, go on! Oh, Christ, oh. No, it's got it. Oh.
Shit!
I thought he'd made it, poor old bugger.
Oh. Oh, isn't it wicked?
Oh, it's gone. Oh, he slipped him.
Oh, my words. Go, go, go.
Oh, he kicked him in the... Kicked him in the egg.
Flipping heck, he's had encounter after encounter.
All he wants to do is get to his mummy.
Yeah. He's got no idea if he's got parents. What are parents? They're not there.
A near miraculous escape.
Yay!
I see.
How we're all cheering.
Yeah, quite right. And the answer, of course, is, you see, first of all, there was the director, a woman director, who had gone to Galapagos in the early series and had spotted this happening at the end of the time. She was doing something else. And she had the wit to say, we've got to go back next year because that's the thing. And secondly, of course, the editor was a skilled. Those are Hollywood skills.
Yeah.
The way you cut away, the way you build the tension, the way you bring up to a climax, the thing, oh, it's going to be killed and so on. And then you add music by a Hollywood composer, you know. So the end is, that's a powerful thing. The last thing you wanted was commentary. I mean, those words, I hope, when they come, were there because you needed that bit of information.
Yeah, to know what's going on.
But that's, you know, team effort.
But what's amazing is you see there people on their sofas anthropomorphizing like mad, saying, oh, he wants his mummy, or maybe he doesn't know where his mummy is. And so so there we are, all cheering an iguana. Not something I ever thought. Do you know what I mean? You might cheer your football team or something, but let's go sit on our sofas and cheer an iguana. Yeah. But it doesn't surprise you that we identify so closely?
No, not at all. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, it's only too easy, really, particularly if you edit it in the way that we have edited it.
Well, the music is fantastic. I looked it up. It's the composers Jacob Shea and Jascha Klieb of Bleeding Fingers, and it just made a big difference, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it's a confection, in a way, in a kind of a Hollywood movie tradition.
But it's like a James Bond movie.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
With the iguana on our side.
But all the drama's there, you see. You don't create it.
Well, the social media engagement with this clip, I mean, it was absolutely huge. In fact, we have a handy slide showing exactly how it took the internet by storm. I mean, people just loved it. Look at the emotion on the girl's face. It's people. I love this because they're observing nature and then we're observing them. I think it's rather marvellous. I really like that. Your programmes have been shown in over 30 international territories. I imagine you can't avoid being aware of the impact your shows have on today's audience. Is there anywhere that you can go that you're not known now?
Well, I mean, I suppose, yes, people have them shown worldwide, and so, yes, people do it.
So what sort of things, when people come up to you, what are the sort of things that they want to ask you? What are the...
Nothing much, really. They don't, I mean...
Just stand and dribble.
I mean, they do occasionally. I remember a taxi driver who turned around and said, hello. And he said, mind if I ask you a question? And I said, no. And he said, what's it all about?
I hope it was a long journey. But new technology has been one of the hallmarks of your career. So we talked about broadcasting in colour, then introducing audiences to 3D television. You've always been a leader and a pioneer in technology in television and broadcasting. In fact, I have to say you're the only person to have won a BAFTA for shows in black and white, colour, HD, 3D and 4K. So let's take a quick look at how technology has played a role in your programmes.
There have been a lot of changes in the way that we've filmed the natural world during the last 50, 60 years.
This one was among the most brilliantly coloured of all chameleons in the world. His eyeballs are bright rust red, and his body and legs striped and blotched with a vivid green.
Its camouflage is exceptional, because it can change its skin colour to match its surroundings.
It's easy to imagine some 12-foot species of pelycosaur like Dimetrodon lying basking on the rocks in the early morning sun.
The colony is constructing a new nest.
To get those shots, we had to tear apart the nest to get the ants to work out in the open. These days, we can do better than that. Most animals, like us, can't see infrared. And that meant that with these cameras, we could now watch them behaving perfectly normally in the dark.
Slow-motion photography enables us to see details that we can't see with the naked eye.
Marine iguanas can maintain their body temperature just about as constantly as I can.
But when they go into the cold sea, their temperature falls very rapidly. Many birds that we might think are plain are almost gaudy in ultraviolet light.
So we talked about in the beginning in ZooQuest, you had to get the animals into the studio because you simply couldn't get close enough. So presumably all the changes in technology have changed now how you approach production.
Hugely.
What are the sort of things that you think that has made just the most enormous difference?
The one big change was from film, which you couldn't see once you'd shot it, to electronics. Just underwater, for example. When I started filming underwater, we had a 100-foot load camera. It took 2 minutes 40. It was in a sort of can with a bit of glass on the front and a wire viewfinder, which gave you an approximate of what you're looking at. And if you shot something, once you shot 2 minutes 40 seconds of it, you had to go up, back to the surface. And that you've got to decompress, you've got to take the lid off, take the camera out, put another thing in, shut it out, and then go down again. And that would take you half an hour, or an hour, depends how deep you were. So once you got an electronic camera that could go on filming for 12 hours, it made a huge difference. But also, there are more things than that. The fact that you could see it immediately after you'd shot it. I mean, when we took the Dragon photograph film, we had to put that onto an aircraft, and you wouldn't know for 3 weeks before what it was like.
Well, because in the beginning, the BBC had required you to do 35mm film, and you persuaded them to do 16, didn't you, because the cameras were lighter, but you couldn't possibly have known as you were putting it in the can whether you'd actually got the shots or not.
Absolutely not. So, and indeed, in Paraguay, I remember, we got film back after, I think it was about 5 weeks. And when we went back into the charco, into the jungle, and I came out again, and we got a telegram into the nearest place with a report, and it said, "Regret to inform you that all shots on the 400mm lens have a hot spot." That means there was a big white spot in the middle of it, and it was all unusable. So all the close-ups we had were unusable.
How heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely heartbreaking. Disaster, really. But not only that, and those are as it were, the obvious advantages of becoming electronic. But the other advantage is that now, you see, with electronic camera, I mean, they're much more sensitive. You can film in the dark, much lower light conditions than you could with celluloid. Not only that, but you can actually take a small camera the size of an apple, less, and put it on the bough of a tree where you know a bird's going to
and just
hop
and leave it.
And leave it there.
Yeah.
And you can actually watch it transmit pictures to your monitor, and you can see whether you've got a shot or not.
But how marvellous, because then you're not disturbing the creatures in any way.
You can put it on now you can put it on a drone. All those aerial shots which used to have aircraft. The drone will take this little camera, and you can get all the aerial shots you want. And so it goes on. I mean, that change to electronics transformed the whole of natural history filming.
And presumably has an impact on discovering new species. I mean, I'm thinking in particular about going down into the deep, to that part of the planet that fewer people have been to than have been to the moon. That is full of wonder. To me, it's like a place where art students have been allowed to go crazy and design fish.
Yes, quite right.
It's just wonderful, isn't it? So presumably, with this new technology, that is when you get those astonishing bioluminescent creatures.
And that was coupled with the new technology of deep sea craft. I mean, a huge privilege. I remember the first time I went down into one of these submersibles, you had to lie on your stomach, like here, and you're a great palaver about how long you were going to stay under one thing or another. And you had to compress, and you had to think about air condition, how long it was going to take. And you looked out through a squint through a little thing the size of a tea plate, you know, like that. I could only go down for a certain short period before you have to come back. Well, now, you see, for Blue Planet 1 and 2, we had marvellous submersibles in which it's like a huge bubble of perspex, transparent. You sit there alongside the pilot, and you can see all the way around you, and you're the same pressure and temperature as you are on land, because they have a rebreathing system. So once you get in, it's all clamped down, and you are rebreathing and recycling, and you're getting the oxygen back and so on. And you sit there eating a bar of chocolate and saying, "Oh no, that's a shark! Oh, wow!" And you can go. I mean, I went down nowhere near as Orla Doherty did, who was the woman who directed the deep in Blue Planet 2. She went down very, very far. I'd never been as far as that, but I've been pretty far. What a privilege. It's just like watching television, as it were.
It's breathtaking. I mean, we talked a little bit about fear, and you said you do have fear. See, I would find that terrifying, because you don't know what's going to come at you through the deep. I mean, there are many creatures down there that we still don't know, aren't there?
No, yeah.
So does the wonder overtake you, and you leave the fear behind at that moment?
Yeah, I mean, you're just there so amazing. And you know, by and large, animals aren't aggressive to you unless you interfere with them. I mean, what is there to be gained from that point of view? I mean, in an animal behaviour sense, why should they attack you? If you are just there being passive and taking it slowly, and not, you know, I mean, if they are getting worried, nearly always what they do is push off. And that, of course, is a bad technique on your part, because you don't want it to push off.
No, you want to keep them all nice and calm.
So you actually do what you can to be submissive and quiet and just observe so they're not alarmed. And that's all. I mean, I've been, what's the worst thing I've been was I've been charged by a rhinoceros when I was in a Land Rover, and the rhinoceros destroyed the Land Rover around me.
That's quite bad.
Yeah, well...
I mean, tricky to ring the AA and say, funny things happen to the Land Rover. Trixie, sorry.
That's the worst, and that's only once in 50 years.
What is wonderful is that you always sound so confident, and you say, well, this is now the anglerfish, and this is their particular way of procreating, whatever. How many times are there shots where you just think, I have no idea what we're looking at, and we have to take it home, and somebody else is going to have to work this out?
Almost, I mean, this is the unromantic thing to say, almost never. Right. The fact is, you should have done your homework. My job is to know what the possibilities are going to happen. You ought to know what they are, and you shouldn't be caught unawares. And I don't think I ever have in a serious way. And not only that, you just don't go out into the natural world and say, or into Africa somewhere, and say, oh, I'm bound to see something interesting, you know, I'll squirt around. You've got an idea as to what your program is, and you want to know that this is the moment when you want to see what? monkeys self-anointing, you know, for curing themselves of ears and using special leaves. And you traipse around with that monkey troupe, and there's a scientist that who told you about it, and he comes along and helps and says, yes, go down to this troupe, they're doing it and what, and you traipse around until you get it. And if they do something else, you don't say, oh, well, I'll forget about the self-anointing, because that's not what you're about. You've got a very strong idea as to what the function, why you are there, and that's what you're after, and that's what you get, and you stay there until you get it.
And you talked about it, I mean, you paid great tribute to the astonishing production team who have won BAFTA. I mean, you've won BAFTAs personally, but they have won BAFTAs as well. Are there any shots that come to mind that you think that was particularly challenging for me and the team? Are there any shots where you think, oh my goodness, I can't quite believe we got that?
Oh yes, I mean lots, because cameramen, you've worked with them, you know, I mean, they are extraordinary people. And when we were working on film, you may be going to try and get some particular shot of, I don't know, a snake doing something or other, and it will be over in a trice, you know, and you don't know whether he's been changing the film or whether it's in focus or whatever, and you say to the cameraman, did you get it? And he either says yes or no, and I've never known them to be one. Not one cameraman has said he's got it when he didn't. Not one.
They absolutely know.
Yeah.
What I think is there must be so many bits that ended up on the cutting room floor that didn't make it to the programme. I just wonder whether those are ever going to be picked up and used for something else.
Yes, well, what they are is actually not quite as good as the shots that you put in. Because if it is a snake or monkey self-anointing, and you may shoot it 3 or 4 times until you're quite sure you've got it right. So that what you left on the cutting room floor is maybe 90% of what you shot, but it's not as good as the 10% that you showed. So you might as well chuck it away. There are occasionally sequences in which you actually you get a very good sequence, but in the end, the overall package of the film, there's no place for it. The film would be too long. And those you do put on the shelf, and those you can bring out and put later, only for the press to say, oh, they didn't shoot all that on that. You know, they shot that last year.
So does that annoy you when you get those kind of critiques?
I think sometimes that people criticise the thing because, you know, we get enough praise. I mean, we do get a lot of praise, and if they say something and particularly if you think it's not deserved, it shouldn't worry you.
And do you keep a note of everything? Have you kept diaries of all the things?
I kept journals, yes. On trips, yes.
Because presumably, I mean, you see so many things, it would be impossible to remember everything.
Yes, absolutely so, and particularly if you're going to write about it. And of course, the thing is, well, I expect you keep diaries, but I only do it on trips. And the trouble is you do all these programs, but you have interview programs, you explain exactly how it was with the gorillas. And after about 10 or 15 years, being absolutely honest about how it happened, you happen to read what actually happened. It wasn't like that at all.
Selective memory. Now, I've got a quick question for the audience. What do Tupac, Elvis Presley, Kate Moss and Sir David Attenborough have in common? Anybody know? The answer's holograms. You now have your very own hologram at the Natural History Museum, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Shall we have a quick exclusive look at it?
Yes.
All right.
1, 2, 3.
Welcome to London's Natural History Museum. This is part of the herbarium, one of the many rooms in the museum that's usually out of bounds to the public. These cupboards contain thousands of plant specimens, but today there are also some other very special objects from elsewhere in the museum that, for the first time ever, you yourself can handle. So go ahead and pick a drawer.
That is astonishing. What did you think about it when they came and suggested to you what we want you to do is to be a hologram? How did you feel about that?
Oh, I think it's, you know, it's fun doing all these new things. I don't know whether it'll catch on or not, and I don't know how popular it's going to be, but it's fun to do and see how to do it. This is a system of, it is high definition, of course, it's 3 dimensions, of course, and it also, not only that, but it allows you to interact with...
You can pick things up, as it were.
You as viewer can pick things up and look at the object, turn it round, see what the skull looks like, or you can actually enlarge it to a huge size, or you can shrink it in size. So we look at a whale, for example, and you can see how its jaws open and it's how it filters exactly within, as it were, within the mouth. And so this is a group of, but in order to get the hologram, which you saw me, I had to go to Seattle in the United States, which is the head of Microsoft. And there they have you go into a studio which everything is green because you use an optical device which filters out the green when you wish. And there are 309 cameras looking at you, all round, and they take, and you have to speak your spiel, and then they use these 300 odd shots to compile statistically an electronic formula which produces you. And it can then make it do anything. So it looks as though I'm actually in the Natural History Museum, but I'm not. I'm in this, it's just a hologram that's in the museum.
But think of that. You had sometimes one camera with 16mm film, and now you've got more than 300.
Yes,
It seems astonishing, doesn't it?
Well, it is, yes. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But then that's what we said in 1952. It'd be interesting to see where this goes.
Well, I have to say I've been to the Natural History Museum many times. I didn't even know there was this cryptogamic herbarium, 780,000 specimens of mosses. What I love is that you don't know which child you're going to wake up to deciding that that is the thing that they want to study. Right. I think that's absolutely fantastic. Yeah. What do you think this is going to contribute to an audience's experience of natural history?
Natural history? I think it'll produce a one-to-one relationship. That you could actually, I mean, the trouble is when you go into the museum, there's that fossil or that stuffed bird or whatever it is, and that's it. And you can't get closer because there's a glass, and you can't see what the underside of it's like and so on. And so this enables you to take this object and to manipulate it. Look at that upside down. See the underside of a trilobite that hasn't lived for, 450 million years? And then you put it down on the table and it walks away. And so it means that you can have a one-to-one relationship with really important objects. And of course, there are objects that are unique in the world, in New York or in New Zealand or in London. And it means if this spreads, that you'll be able to take and look at these objects in that sort of way and examine in that one-to-one way and get a feeling about it, and which I'm sure will captivate, I'm sure it'll captivate children, but it should captivate everybody. It's fascinating.
Well, I wonder as well whether it'll change the way in which specialists work, because they know somebody is going to be able to do that, to turn it around, and maybe they would look at it differently themselves.
Yes, I think they do. I mean, one of the things we look at in this group that we've just done in the Natural History Museum is the jaw of a pterosaur, the flying reptile that flew above the dinosaurs. And it's the only one in the world, you know, and it's a kind of thing that nobody's ever seen before. And I am sure that there are specialists in pterosaurs biology on the other side of the world who will be thrilled to be able to look at this thing and that, oh yeah, I always wondered just how that tooth, how that fitted into the upper jaw, and you can make it do that, and you can see it, you see. So, I mean, let's not exaggerate. I mean, scientists are very clever people, and they don't actually need all those kind of visual aids. But a lot of lesser people do, like me, you know, and so the thought that I could be able to looking at an object that's in New Zealand Museum, which I was interested in, is lovely.
I'm slightly worried now that people can do it to you now that you're a hologram. Can they move your mouse and just... feeling slightly
I've got someone with a hand up my back. Yeah.
How did it feel to see yourself in that way? Was it strange?
Well, I mean, I suppose you ought to say modestly, yes, it's extraordinary. How, it's so worrying and it's upsetting and so on. But the fact of the matter is that if you work in our game, you actually see yourself all the time.
Yes, I've seen myself from hideous angles. But
hideous or whatever. There's not much you don't know about the face, the way you are, and if you're working on making programs, you've got these shots in which you do things and you run them backwards and forwards, and so you know this character in there perfectly well. He doesn't really have much connection with what you are, but you know him perfectly well.
What I love is that you're so up to date and you love all the technology, but you don't do email.
No.
Don't drive.
No.
Your mobile phone is the oldest one I think I've ever seen. It's astonishing. Why do you not... What is that division in your private life that there isn't the new technology? It doesn't seem to particularly appeal to you.
Idleness and stupidity, I dare say, some might say. But actually, there's quite enough for me to cope with as it is. I mean, I get 30 or 40 letters a day, 5 days, 6 days a week,
wow.
You know? That's quite enough to deal with. And I know I've got lots of friends, and I bet you, how many emails do you get a day?
Oh, it's hideous, and it's the ones from Lakeland that annoy me. I don't know how I've ended up on their list. I don't know how that's happened.
Well, exactly so.
Yeah.
See, and so my view is if they want to say something to me, write me a letter. That immediately says that's going to cost 20p, you know. That cuts them down.
I love a proper letter, though. Do you have a letter opener? I've got a letter opener. I think it's a very nice thing.
I do. Yeah.
Yes, quite right. Let's just talk a little bit about the negative impact that our actions are having on our planet. It is one of the things that I think the younger generation are absolutely awake to, and I think the finale of Blue Planet 2 was very important. It saw you address this negative impact. Let's just have a quick look.
In some parts of the ocean, it's estimated that there are now over 1 million pieces of plastic for every square mile. And we're only beginning to discover just how seriously that affects marine life. Once in the ocean, plastic breaks down into tiny fragments, microplastics. Along with all the industrial chemicals that have drained into the ocean, these form a potentially toxic soup.
The really small organisms can mistake these tiny, tiny plastics as food. Then the larger organisms eat the plankton, the larger fish eat those smaller fish, and so on and so forth.
Dolphins are at the top of this food chain, and it's now thought that pollutants may be building up in their tissues to such a degree that a mother's contaminated milk could kill her calf. Industrial pollution and the discarding of plastic waste must be tackled for the sake of all life in the ocean.
I mean, it makes me just want to sob. And I can't bear it. You have loved the planet. You have loved it for all the time that you have been showing us its glories. How does it make you feel to see those things?
Oh, dreadful. I mean, it makes you weep, really literally. The one, I remember seeing it in actuality. I mean, those are shots. I wasn't there for any of those shots by the cameraman, but I was there when on South Georgia in the Antarctic, when there was an albatross chick, and it takes a long time to grow because they're so big. And the parents go off for up to 3 weeks at a time, scouring the ocean in order to find food. And the chick waits there patiently for 2 or 3 weeks, just in the blizzards. And the parent the female came in, and her crop was full, and she opened her beak, and the little chick begged, and out from her mouth came a torrent of food, and every single part of it was plastic. And when you see that, how profoundly can you be moved by those? I mean, and when you think of the implication of all over around the world, that sort of thing is going on. So you have an obligation to do something about it. At least, the least you can do is to say what happens.
And do you feel, I mean, you have the most enormous reach. Do you feel you have a responsibility then to try?
Yes, well, yes, you do. I mean, in a way, it's a complex thing, isn't it? How? Because you've got a huge privilege, and you do exploit this privilege. I mean, you can't exploit it politically. You can't put political views on. But when does politics end, and when does morality begin? So I think you have to be very careful about what you say and how you say it. But there are overwhelming truths that cannot be avoided that you have to say, and that was one of them in Blue Planet. I must say that I think all the team, all of us, we were astonished. I mean, we felt powerfully about those things, but we were astonished at the effect it had. And it isn't as though we've never mentioned it before. We have. But there was something about the timing of that particular program, not only in, as it were, in the schedules, as it certainly got a very big audience, but the timing in the nation's awareness of the world. I mean, we are devastated by all sorts of problems at the moment, which we needn't enumerate, but because the world's in a rough state. And so people look to natural history programs in a way for some sort of consolation, that at least that is something that's true and that's happening and as often is beautiful and so on. But when that too has infected, and it makes you aware of what you've done and are doing, very directly, we can't do much about global warming or climate change directly, but we can stop using plastic. And kids feel this very strongly. Say to their parents, we mustn't use that. Look what it does to the albatross and the bird. And so all you have to do is to be honest about it. There it is, and it hit the bell. It rang the bell at that particular moment. Why it hasn't hit the bell before, I don't know. But certainly it did do this time, and we were gratified that actually people see that it's an important truth that has come to them through their television set, and that it's something that they can do something about, and something that they can ask the politicians on their behalf to do something about. And that's the sort of communication that broadcasters ought to have, I think, with their public.
Well, I have to say, the only bit that heartens me is the young people. It's my kids' generation.
Yes.
Who are now saying, you don't have to have that, Mum, and don't have that, and making you have another look. And it is because of programs like yours. Just yesterday, McDonald's announced that they're going to stop using plastic straws and going to have paper or cardboard ones, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So as well as feeling depressed, maybe one could also think, well, that's what's good is we've woken up. Do you think we have?
Yes, but if we have, it's only the beginning. I mean, we've got a long way to go. Yeah. I mean, we've made a real mess of the world. We really, really have. I mean, animals. I've been doing it, as you know, for 50, 60 years, and the animals I saw in the sort of numbers I saw 60 years ago have gone, and we've got to do something about it.
Well, I think is there not a floating area of plastic in the oceans now that's the size of France? I mean, it is a terrifying thought. So do you think about those things when you're writing your commentary? Do you think, how can I say this without sounding political or preachy, but still trying to get the message across.
Yes, and again, one speaks for the team, you know. I didn't edit those pictures of the film. The production team did. I supplied the words. But we all feel the same. And I'm speaking to the Natural History Unit down in Bristol. The greatest unit of its kind, you know, in the world, and a huge privilege to be working for them, something that this country can be very proud of. And that unit message from this has gone round the world.
So when you sit down to write your commentary, do you agonise over every word, or does it sometimes just flow straight out of you?
No, never, ever flowed, ever. I don't know how it is with you, but with me, I sit with a script in front of me and a television set, and we go through it again and again and again. And you've got to hit the right picture with the right word again and again. It's a kind of carpentry. It's a kind of joinery. And it isn't inspiration in that sort of sense. It's hard work. Yeah. And it mustn't sound like hard work. It's got to sound as though it's absolutely natural.
As if you're just chatting to us, which is what it always sounds like. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to dust off your channel controller hat just for a second and pop it on. Imagine that you are going to commission a programme with the goal of empowering, I don't know, meaningful environmental action. What kind of programme would it be, do you think?
Well, I mean, you'd have to show what the consequences are. And you can't, I mean, it's irresponsible just going on showing on the consequences without, if you're going to do a program, what you're asking me to do is not just a 3-minute segment, which is, but an hour's program. Well, then you can't go on just whoa, whoa, whoa. You've got to say what can be done.
Yeah, there has to be an action plan, doesn't there?
That's right.
Yeah.
And I have to be grateful that politicians are taking notice of it, you know. And I needn't name names, but in this government, I mean, whatever its colour was politically, whatever is in power, you've got to take, this is serious. This is serious.
When you look at all the clips that we've been showing, I mean, it's an astonishing range of material. The scale of it is stupendous. You have dedicated your life to natural history, introduced us to the most amazing locations and animals. When you look back, do you have any regrets? Do you have any things that you think, oh, I wish I'd done that differently, or I wish I hadn't done that particular thing?
Oh, you can always think, I mean, if you look at a programme of past, and I bet you're the same, you can think, oh, I don't do that very well, you know, and I muffed that, and what on earth allowed me to put that through? But by and large, in general terms, I am very grateful for the opportunities that come my way. I can't believe I'm that lucky. No, I really can't. I mean, who wouldn't give their right arm to do that sort of thing, you know? And there are thousands of people who could do it as well as you. Even that's immodest to say, tens of thousands, you know, and you just happen to be there at the right time, and you should be grateful. But I certainly am.
So I'm confident you have a million other things you still want to do. What is next for you?
Well, I'm off in going to Africa in 3 weeks' time. I think.
Of course you are.
Yeah, yeah, which is a new series, and again, it's the Natural History Unit, and it's their idea, not mine, and it's a brilliant idea. I don't know whether I'm really supposed to talk about it, but I mean, you know,
we won't tell anybody.
We're all professionals in this room, what we're going to do, what they have already done, is they've gone to a group of animals, a little community of animals, basically, usually nearly always a family, Cape hunting dogs, lions, chimpanzees. And we say, we are going to follow this pack for 3 years, and we don't know what's going to happen. Whatever does happen, we will be there, and we will show it to you, and we will tell you the truth. Now, I won't go into details as to what does happen, but I can tell you there's some fairly dark moments in it, as you might imagine. And we won't tidy it up, and we won't conceal, twist it in any way. We'll say what actually happened. And that's a new concept, and that's to the credit of the Natural History that they're doing that. And I'm privileged to be told and asked to write some of the commentary.
Oh, Magnificent. Now, you got rid of the kangaroo as the mascot.
Yes.
For BBC Two. If you had to choose a mascot for yourself, is there a creature that you say, that's the one that I like the best?
I can think of some fairly salacious something like that. I don't know. I tell you, human beings are a very odd thing. I don't want to be a fish. I don't even want to be a monkey. No. I am fascinated that the opportunities a Homo sapiens individual has are extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And we have that in our hands. And that I've been allowed to do what I've done is just the most extraordinary privilege. So I don't particularly want to be a hummingbird or a sloth. Oh, a sloth, that's not bad. And there are the various other polygamous animals I can think of, but never mind. Yes.
I think you should just be yourself. I think that's absolutely fine. I'm afraid that is all that we have got time for. On behalf of the audience, I have to say, David, this has been one of the greatest privileges of my life, sitting here chatting to you. And I thank you on behalf of the audience and for our wider audience who are going to watch it online. But most of all, I thank you on behalf of all the creatures of this planet who have cared for and focused our attention on their behalf. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
Sir David Attenborough.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.